I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The front gates of my own ranch were twisted like pretzels. My "Welcome Home" banner lay in the dirt, torn and dusty. My American flag had been slashed down the middle, hanging like a defeated soldier. But that wasn't the worst part. My house, my home, was locked up like a prison. The HOA had changed my locks. Without warning. While I was serving overseas. And then, just 5 minutes after I touched U.S. soil, my military brothers showed up in 2 armored trucks. Without hesitation, they aimed at the HOA's fancy wrought iron gates. Boom. They blew the gates wide open. Smoke everywhere. Screaming. HOA members running in circles. Someone even fainted near the fountain. But I didn't blink. I walked straight through the gates. And then, I heard the police sirens coming. Was I about to be arrested on my first day home from war? Let me tell you how it all started. Before I left, I lived in a quiet ranch-style home in a gated neighborhood in Colorado Springs. The air was always crisp and you could smell the pine trees even through your car vents. My name's Tyler Jackson, and I'm a 36-year-old U.S. Army veteran. Been in the service for 14 years. Done 4 deployments. And before this nightmare started, I thought I had finally earned a little peace. I bought my house 3 years ago with cash from my military savings and a bonus from my last tour. It was a modest 2-story ranch home with a wraparound porch and a flagpole out front. But it was mine. I made friends with the older folks on the street, especially Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, who brought me cookies every 4th of July. But I also had to deal with the HOA. And that's where things got rough. The HOA president, a woman named Deborah Langston, made it clear from the beginning that she didn't trust military types. Her words. Not mine. She once told me, "People like you don't understand how to keep a neighborhood civil." Imagine saying that to someone who's been trained to protect civil life. Still, I followed the rules. I mowed my lawn, painted my fence the right color, even paid the ridiculous $600 monthly HOA fee. But 1 week before my most recent deployment to the Middle East, Deborah knocked on my door and handed me a letter. "You need to remove the American flag," she said, her lips pursed like she'd sucked on a lemon. "Excuse me?" I blinked. "It's too big. Violates community visuals." I told her firmly, "That flag stays. I'm not pulling it down just because it offends your eyes." She glared at me. "You'll regret this." I thought it was just an empty threat. I was wrong. Fast forward 11 months. My platoon and I had just completed our tour. Dusty, exhausted, but alive. A few of us were flying into Colorado together before parting ways. My best buddy, Nate, and I had planned a small get-together on my ranch as a homecoming celebration. But when we pulled up in my friend's pickup truck, we saw the gates, closed, padlocked, and then I noticed the sign. "This property has been reclaimed by the HOA due to rule violations and delinquency." I was shaking. Not because I was scared. Because I was furious. What violations? What delinquency? I'd set up automatic payments for every fee. I even had a neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, check my mailbox weekly and forward my HOA letters. And then I looked over at my porch. Gone. They had ripped out my flagpole. I turned to Nate. "Call the boys. Tell them it's time." He just nodded. 10 minutes later, 2 military trucks rolled down the street. Not rented. Not for show. These were the real deal, brought in by my friends in logistics and special ops who lived nearby. These weren't kids with firecrackers. These were trained men, all veterans, all furious. We set up a small perimeter. Told neighbors to stay back. Deborah and the other HOA board members were hiding near the entrance kiosk, peeking out like rats behind a glass cage. And then came the command. "Clear the gate." Boom. The steel groaned, then collapsed with a crash that echoed through the hills. I marched through the smoke, my boots stomping over the wreckage. But then, police sirens blared in the distance. Someone had called the cops. And guess what? Deborah pointed directly at me. "There. That's the ringleader. Arrest that man. He's a threat to this community." I stood in front of the wrecked gate, hands on my hips, watching the police cruisers pull up. Red and blue lights danced across the walls of my home, the very home the HOA had locked me out of. 3 officers jumped out, guns holstered but hands twitching. One of them, a younger guy with a buzz cut and nervous eyes, stepped forward. "Sir, we received a report of property destruction, illegal trespassing, and threats of violence." Before I could even speak, Deborah cut in, flailing her arms like a windmill. "There he is. He brought armed men and blew open the gates. He's a danger. Arrest him." The young officer turned back to me. "Sir, what's your name?" I stepped forward slowly. "Staff Sergeant Tyler Jackson, U.S. Army." I just got back from an 11-month deployment. This is my house. That woman had my locks changed while I was overseas. The officer blinked. My buddy Nate walked up beside me and handed over a leather binder. We have proof. Deeds. Payment records. Security camera footage from the neighbors. Everything. Another officer opened the binder and flipped through the documents. His brow furrowed. This looks very official. Because it is, I replied, my voice steady. I never missed a payment. I never broke a single law. And if I wanted to make trouble, trust me, you'd know. The officer stepped aside and radioed something in. Deborah, now realizing her plan was falling apart, looked pale. You can't just blow up private property. But then officer number 2 turned to her. Ma'am, actually, based on this paperwork, the house and land belong solely to Mr. Jackson. The HOA has no legal authority to seize property without court involvement. But the bylaws? Ma'am, bylaws aren't stronger than federal property rights. Nate leaned over and whispered in my ear. Checkmate. Let's back up a little. 6 months into my deployment, I started receiving odd emails from my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins. He said the HOA had stopped mowing my lawn, which they'd agreed to do in my absence. Then he noticed someone snooping around my front door. 2 months later, Jenkins emailed me again, this time in all caps. Tyler, they changed your locks. I saw them do it. I tried to stop them. My heart sank. In the middle of a war zone, while dodging mortars and rationing water, I was being kicked out of my own home, thousands of miles away. I immediately tried to call Deborah. No answer. So I called my lawyer. He said there was no active court claim against my property. But the HOA had filed complaints about visual disruptions, noise violations, and unkept appearance. Apparently, Deborah had taken pictures of my American flag at an angle that disturbed neighborhood aesthetic flow. Whatever that means. And since I wasn't around to defend myself, they claimed I had abandoned the home and that the HOA had the right to protect the property from degradation. I couldn't even respond because I was in active duty. They knew it. They counted on that. The police decided not to press charges, at least not against me. But one of the HOA members, a man named Greg, wasn't as lucky. Turns out he'd been the one who personally hired a locksmith and entered my house. And that's criminal trespass. Greg was handcuffed right there in the cul-de-sac, staring at me like I was the villain in his story. But I didn't feel guilty. Not for a second. Because what none of them knew yet was that my military discharge papers also came with a new title. Federal Investigator for Veteran Property Claims. Yeah. I wasn't just any soldier. I was now part of a special division that investigates fraudulent housing actions against active duty and retired military. And Deborah? She was at the top of the list. As the cops drove away with Greg in the back seat, Deborah tried one last time. This isn't over. You'll pay for this. I turned slowly. You changed the locks on a deployed soldier. You stole my home. You tried to erase everything I built with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But the worst part. I stepped closer, my voice low. You disrespected the very people who fight for the freedom you hide behind. She froze. The other HOA members slowly backed away. One even whispered, I told you not to mess with him. I watched as Deborah walked back into her precious clubhouse, slamming the door shut behind her. But the fight wasn't over. Not even close. Because what I found inside my house later that night was worse than anything I'd imagined. I walked through the busted gates and up to my front door, still trembling from everything that had just happened. The smell hit me first. Rotten food. Mold. Sour water. It was the kind of smell that makes your stomach turn before your brain even registers what's wrong. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare key Nate had brought me, it was from the original set before the locks were changed, and slowly opened the front door. What I saw inside didn't just break my heart. It lit a fire in me. Furniture had been moved. My grandfather's war medals, gone from the display case. My military shadow box, cracked open and dumped on the floor. Framed photos of my mom, my younger brother who passed, shattered glass everywhere. It was like someone tried to erase me from my own life. In the kitchen, the fridge door was left open, the power cut. My food had spoiled and leaked across the floor. Insects crawled across the counters. Someone had trashed my house. I stepped into the living room. The TV was missing. My flag, that beautiful folded triangle I'd kept from my late father's funeral, was nowhere to be found. And on the wall, an ugly black marker, someone had written, "Shouldn't have left." I stood there, fists clenched so tight my knuckles went white. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was personal. Let me tell you what kind of man Greg is. Back before I left for deployment, he'd applied for a landscaping contract to service all the lawns in the community. I'd spoken up at the HOA meeting, saying we should consider other bids to be fair to all residents. Deborah didn't like that. Greg really didn't like that. So when I deployed, it was the perfect time for payback. He took over the HOA's maintenance committee. He convinced the board I was neglecting my home. And then, when no one stopped him, he walked in and destroyed everything that mattered to me. And Deborah? She sat on her little throne and allowed it. I spent the next 48 hours doing 3 things. Taking photos. Every damaged item, every stolen memory, every nasty word on the walls. Calling my lawyer. We filed an immediate civil claim and opened a criminal investigation. Activating my new clearance. Because I wasn't just a discharged soldier anymore. I had access to federal-level investigators who specialized in HOA corruption and veteran abuse. I filed an official report and handed over everything I had. The response? Explosive. Within a week, federal agents were walking the streets of my neighborhood, knocking on doors, interviewing residents. Several homeowners secretly came to me and said they'd been threatened by Deborah too, but they were scared to speak up. Now they weren't. A quiet uprising was growing. But just as things were starting to move in my favor, something happened. One night around 2 a.m. I heard glass break. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my boots and crept downstairs. The back window had been shattered. I stepped outside, heart racing. That's when I saw it. Smoke. My garage, where I kept my tools, military gear and old motorcycle, was on fire. Someone had set my property on fire. I called 911, grabbed the nearest hose and started spraying as much water as I could. The fire department arrived just in time to save the house. But the garage? It was toast. Everything inside burned to ash. The firefighters found a glass bottle near the wreckage, a Molotov cocktail. This wasn't vandalism. This was arson. When the investigators showed up the next morning, I handed over my outdoor security footage. Guess who showed up on camera? Greg. In a black hoodie, sneaking through my backyard like a coward. He thought I wouldn't have cameras? He forgot who he was messing with. That afternoon, Greg was arrested again. This time for arson, destruction of property, and attempted intimidation of a federal witness. Deborah, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. Until one morning. I woke up to find a certified letter taped to my door. From the HOA. Read. Due to your recent behavior and military-style aggression, your property is under review for permanent removal from the neighborhood registry. You are hereby banned from all HOA meetings effective immediately. They were trying to kick me out of my own neighborhood. But they didn't realize I'd been preparing something much bigger behind the scenes. Because I wasn't fighting them alone anymore. I had an entire army of veterans, and lawyers and reporters, ready to bring down everything Deborah stood for. And we had a plan. A plan to take the HOA board apart piece by piece. But before we could launch it, one of my military brothers disappeared. And the message he left behind was chilling. They found out. Watch your back. I stared at my phone. The message was still there. They found out. Watch your back. Nate. That was the last thing my best friend sent before he vanished. No calls. No texts. No social media. Nothing. Nate was a former combat medic. He didn't scare easily. He'd been through bomb blasts and ambushes and still came out cracking jokes. For him to send something like that? It meant real danger. I rushed to his apartment just outside Fort Carson. Door unlocked. Lights off. No sign of struggle. But his wallet, keys and phone were still on the kitchen counter. The only thing missing was him. And the only people with a reason to want Nate gone? The HOA. Let me explain how deep this rabbit hole goes. After the fire and Greg's second arrest, the neighborhood exploded in whispers. Residents started opening up about years of abuse, fines for things like planting the wrong flowers, or being forced to repaint their mailboxes because the shade was too dull. Deborah and her small group of cronies ran this HOA like a private empire. They controlled the finances, the vendors, the rules, and they bullied anyone who got in their way. But Nate had done something worse. He'd begun digging into the HOA's bank accounts. He'd been helping me quietly collect financial records, using his clearance and connections to get to the truth. The money I paid each month? It wasn't all going to lawn care and street lights. Thousands of dollars were being funneled into a private maintenance fund Deborah controlled directly. And now, Nate was gone. I went to the police. They filed a missing person report, sure, but no urgency. No search team. They acted like he just needed space. But I knew better. So I called my unit. Within hours, I had 4 other brothers stationed across Colorado gathered at my ranch. Operation Dig In began. We took shifts and watched the HOA clubhouse day and night. We ran license plates. Drones flew overhead. We tracked movements. We reviewed security footage we had pulled from hidden neighborhood cameras. And then we got our first break. Greg's truck, parked outside an abandoned property 2 streets down. It wasn't even listed on the HOA registry anymore. A foreclosure from years ago. But the windows had been boarded up, recently. We knew what that meant. That night, under cover of darkness, we approached the house. 2 of my brothers kept watch while I picked the lock. Yeah, we're trained for this kind of thing. Inside it smelled like mildew and dust. We moved room by room until we heard a cough. Down in the basement. I rushed downstairs, flashlight trembling in my hand, and there he was, Nate. Tied to a chair, dehydrated but alive. "About time," he croaked, trying to smile through chapped lips. We cut him loose and got him out of there fast. He'd been grabbed outside his apartment and held for nearly 36 hours. Greg and another HOA crony named Brett had been using the house as a temporary holding spot. For what? For people who caused too much trouble. Once Nate was safe, the story exploded. We gave everything to a reporter from a local Denver station. She aired the entire investigation: financial fraud, illegal home seizures, abuse of veterans, attempted arson, kidnapping. The story hit national news in under 48 hours. That's when the Department of Justice got involved. Federal charges were filed against Deborah, Greg, Brett, and 3 other HOA board members. They were all indicted for conspiracy, fraud, theft, and obstruction. The HOA was disbanded within the week. Deborah was arrested live on TV, in her bathrobe, screaming about how the military is taking over the neighborhood. "Yes, ma'am. We are." But just when I thought it was over, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Read, "This isn't over. You brought down the HOA. But we were just a small part of something bigger. You've poked the wrong beast. You and your little army better watch your 6." No signature. Just a small red stamp at the bottom, a symbol I didn't recognize at first, until Nate pointed it out. That's the mark of a developers consortium. The ones who fund HOA expansions. They buy land, force homeowners out, and build luxury real estate. Apparently, Deborah was working for someone else all along. Now, I was in deeper than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about a flag, a gate, or even a house anymore. It was about power, control, and a hidden network that used HOA rules to scare veterans, single moms, and elderly homeowners off their land, so they could flip it for profit. And they didn't like that I pushed back. They especially didn't like that I won. But I wasn't scared, because I had a plan. And this time, we were going to burn their entire empire to the ground. We didn't waste time. That letter with the red stamp? It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. A symbol tied to a massive property development group operating across multiple states. They specialized in one thing: using dirty HOA tactics to force people off their land. They'd offer bribes to HOA boards, then fake violations until homeowners either sold or got kicked out. Then they'd build luxury condos, slap on a community improvement fee, and repeat the cycle. Deborah and Greg? Just foot soldiers in a much bigger war. And now they were mad we'd messed up their plan. But they underestimated us. Nate, still recovering from his time in the abandoned house, joined me and the others around the big table in my ranch kitchen. He spread out maps, financial trails, and development patterns all across the state. He pointed to 3 neighborhoods that had suffered similar HOA takeovers. Same complaints. Same board behavior. Same red stamp in the paperwork. "This isn't just shady," he said. "This is organized." So we made a new plan. Expose everything. We contacted reporters who had picked up our story, sent them evidence, and put together a timeline of illegal land grabs. Meanwhile, I filed new reports under my Federal Veteran Protection Unit. It wasn't long before the U.S. Attorney's Office took notice. An investigation was opened, this time at the federal level. But the people behind the red stamp? They fought back. 2 days later we got a visit. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up my driveway. 4 men in suits stepped out, not police, not FBI. No badges. One of them knocked, calm and cold. "Mr. Jackson?" he asked. I stood tall at the door. "That's me." He gave a polite smile. "We'd like to speak privately." "About what?" "About ending this crusade of yours." Behind me, Nate quietly unholstered the small pistol on his hip and stepped out onto the porch. "I think you boys are lost," he said, eyes sharp. The lead guy didn't flinch. "No need for trouble. We just want to make you an offer. Generous, of course. Sell the ranch. Walk away. Take your money and forget all this." I crossed my arms. "And if I say no?" His smile vanished. "Then you'll be dealing with people who don't knock before coming in." He dropped a black card on my porch and walked back to the SUV. The others followed, all without another word. That night, I reinforced my property like I was back on a base in hostile territory. Motion sensors, cameras, floodlights, tactical perimeter. We weren't just defending my land now, we were protecting evidence. And then we got lucky. An anonymous source emailed us internal files from the consortium's office. Emails, payments, shell companies, secret meetings with HOA leaders in 5 states. They were operating under a name. Nova Growth Group. And they'd funneled over $4.3 million into buying influence in small neighborhoods just like mine. We handed everything to the feds. 2 days later, the arrests started. Agents raided 3 corporate offices. They seized hard drives, froze accounts, and charged Nova executives with fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. It was everywhere on the news. Veteran uncovers HOA scandal tied to nationwide land fraud. People started calling my ranch Freedom Hill. Reporters showed up. So did veterans, homeowners, activists, people who had been bullied into silence. But as the truth spread, so did the danger. One night, while I was doing a live Zoom interview with a military news channel, someone fired 2 shots at my house. One bullet hit the porch beam. The other missed me by inches and shattered the back window. I dropped to the floor. Nate tackled me behind the couch. My military brothers swept the house in minutes. But the shooter was gone. Whoever it was wanted me afraid. They failed. The next morning, I went live on national TV. No script. No lawyer. Just me. I stood on the porch of my ranch, the broken window behind me taped over. Camera in front. Flag flying high. My name is Tyler Jackson. I served this country with honor for 14 years. I bled for it. I lost brothers for it. And I came home to find out that the very soil I defended was being stolen, from me, from veterans, from honest Americans. I won't run. I won't sell. And I won't stop until every last one of these cowards in suits is dragged into the light. The video went viral overnight. But then, I got the news that Deborah had been released on bail. She wasn't just walking free, she had filed a civil countersuit against me, claiming emotional damage and loss of reputation. The court date? 2 weeks. And get this, the trial was set to take place in a courtroom inside the very community center Deborah once ran. They were bringing the war back to my doorstep. But they didn't realize, this time I wasn't walking in alone. I was bringing every person they ever bullied, every document they ever forged, and every voice they tried to silence. Because justice was no longer a fight. It was a reckoning. The courtroom was packed. Not just with lawyers and reporters, but with dozens of people from my neighborhood. Veterans, retirees, families with kids. Even Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins sat in the front row, holding hands like this was church on Sunday. Deborah sat on the left side, perfectly powdered, wearing a stiff blue blazer and her signature pearl necklace. She had 3 lawyers beside her. One of them whispered constantly in her ear, probably trying to coach her on how to look damaged. Across from her, I sat in full uniform. Not for attention, but because I wanted to remind her exactly who she tried to destroy. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Civil case #8743B. Langston vs. Jackson. Alleging emotional damages due to public defamation. I sat up straight. They were suing me. For exposing the truth. Deborah's lawyer went first. He painted her as a devoted public servant who simply enforced rules and was traumatized by the aggressive military backlash. He described my return home as hostile, explosive, and threatening to community peace. He called my friends armed men. He even claimed my drone footage was invasive and unlawful. But none of it made sense. And when the judge asked if they had proof that my documents were fake, they had nothing. Then my turn came. I stood up, took a deep breath, and looked the judge straight in the eyes. "Your Honor," I began, "I served this country for over a decade. I missed holidays, lost friends, and nearly lost my life more than once. I bought my ranch fair and square. Paid every fee. Followed every rule. And while I was away, fighting for the very freedoms Deborah claims to protect. She changed my locks. She let her team ransack my home. She called the police on me. And then she tried to ruin the lives of anyone who stood by me. I stepped aside and nodded. And one by one, my witnesses stood up. Mr. Jenkins described how Deborah screamed at him for supporting a soldier. Nate took the stand and told the courtroom how he was tied up and left without food or water. An ex-HOA treasurer revealed how Deborah ordered fake violation letters and signed off unauthorized fines. We showed photos, emails, videos. Every word she said crumbled under the truth. When it was all over, the judge leaned forward. "I've heard enough," he said, shaking his head slowly. He looked directly at Deborah. "Ms. Langston, not only is your case without merit, it's malicious." Mr. Jackson acted within his rights and frankly showed incredible restraint. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Jackson, I hereby dismiss this case. And furthermore, I am referring Ms. Langston for criminal review under abuse of authority and possible witness intimidation." Boom. Case closed. Deborah's jaw dropped. Her lawyers scrambled. Reporters ran out to break the story. And I just stood there taking it in. Outside the courtroom, the people waiting clapped and hugged. Veterans saluted me. One little boy ran up and gave me a crayon drawing of an American flag and wrote under it, "Thank you for not giving up." I choked up for the first time in months. Because this wasn't just about one house or one man. This was about every person who's been bullied by a system built to scare them silent. And I had proven that you can fight back and win. A week later, something special happened. The mayor of Colorado Springs visited my ranch with a proclamation. This land is now recognized as a protected veteran heritage site. No HOA, no private group, no developer can ever take it from you. They even renamed the access road Jackson Way. Today the gates are wide open. No guards. No fear. The house is rebuilt, the flag flies higher than ever, and my porch has a new sign that reads, "Welcome home. Unless you're here to lie, steal, or bully." We hold monthly cookouts now. Veterans, neighbors, families. Everyone's invited. Even the folks who used to be too scared to speak out. Because this land is not just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who believes that no one, not even an HOA, can silence what's right. Fire if this story made your blood boil or gave you hope. Don't scroll past. Speech balloon, tell us in the comments. Should HOAs have this kind of power? Round pushpin, where are you watching from? Military medal, and to all our veterans out there, we see you, we thank you. Oncoming fist, medium skin tone, like, share, and subscribe if you believe no one should lose their home while fighting for their country. Stop sign, because some battles don't end on the battlefield.